Sports fans who have had nothing else to watch for the last number of weeks tuned in droves to see The Last Dance, the documentary about Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls, the dynasty that won 6 out of 8 NBA championships. Question is, now that it's done, what other athlete would you like to see a similar documentary series about? Let's dive down that rabbit hole. There have been, 2, 3, 10 million athletes that we've seen over the years since the dawn of competitive sports. There's got to be somebody in there besides just Michael Jordan that we'd want to see a multi-part documentary about. Someone who would fascinate us, that could hold our attention for that length of time. Who would that be? Rick Zamperin, who would be the person that you could not wait to get in front of the TV set to watch?
Wow, there's actually a few on this list, including a non-athlete, and I won't go through the entire list because I like sharing. So one of the other guys can bring up what's likely on my list as well. But for me, at the top of the list would be Muhammad Ali. And I've seen documentaries and series and specials on Ali. He was such an amazing boxer, number one, but an amazing humanitarian, a character, a funny guy. He could be serious. He transcended the sport. He was, considered one of the greatest. If we're talking about, focusing on some of the greatest athletes of our lifetime, he fits that bill. The whole Vietnam thing. It is such a compelling story from top to bottom. The way his life ended, being at the Olympics in '96 with that touching moment of lighting the flame in Atlanta. There's so many layers to the Muhammad Ali story, to the Cassius Clay story, that it would be phenomenal to have a 10-part series. And not only talking to Ali, but his family, fellow boxers, trainers, all that, broadcasters would make for a really intriguing 10-part series.
Bubba, I would guess that name was on your list too.
Yeah, I mean, certainly his story and the layers to his story and the fact that he really had about 3 careers into one, and how he transcended himself from being a young kid from Louisville, Kentucky, middle class kind of guy that, they called him Louisville the Lip. I mean, he was as explosive and chatty and talkative as anyone. And what I would find interesting about Muhammad is really to get within the fact of why he was so braggadocious, why he talked so much. And, I think we all knew at the end of the line that a lot of it was done for the promotion of a fight. I mean, he modeled himself after Gorgeous George, a wrestler of the 50s. And he got that sort of mentality in his mind, and that lasted throughout his entire career. And it's funny because when we see people predicting fights or predicting sports or chatting the way that he did at the time, it almost seems non-genuine to some extent, maybe because he was the first guy to be the way he was. And I think that would be interesting to get into within the mind of, why he was the way he was.
Steve, my concern, Steve, with that, and I want to throw this to you.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, no.
Ali is gone now, and Ali's reputation, to me, the concern with a documentary about him, as much as it could be great, has the risk of becoming almost maudlin and so deferential that, I mean, at least with the Jordan thing, even though his production company was in it, there was some critical analysis.
Some. Remembering that, Jordan had fair control over that as well. And that's, exactly, of course, what Ali would not have in this case. His estate might have some control over what would happen. I agree that this is a great one, and it kind of dovetails in the one that I'll bring up lately, because part of what makes Jordan compelling, and I think we all agree it was too long, right? That wasn't a 10-part. There wasn't enough in there for 10. I mean, we watched it, and there was some character development that 10 gave it, but it probably should, as you and I were saying, Scott, probably a little shorter. I think Ali is one of those ones that could go 20. But one of the things that made Jordan's interesting was that it sort of fit into the times too. We saw what the times were about. This was a transition of something in our society. The global thing, it dovetailed a lot with social media's rise and the internet's rise and all those kinds of things. Well, take Ali, and Rick really pointed that out well. what he was the sign of in the times. And Bubba, even when he said, well, you know, how much of it was real and this kind of thing. Well, part of that created Jordan in the long run, which was the sort of the culture of the me athlete. And that was going on in society at the same time too. The whole Vietnam thing was going on, the whole what was called at the time Black Power thing going on, the whole, you know, the first time most of us ever heard of Islam in our entire lives, we didn't even know what it was. At least, you know, if you were younger and that kind of, you had no idea. So there were a lot of things there that made him and much more culturally important, Ali, than Jordan could ever be. I mean, Jordan recognized something, but I mean, Ali was Jordan, the best known athlete in the world when you didn't have the vehicles to make him that way. And I'm talking electronics.
Yeah, no, and I mean, look, there's no question about Michael Jordan as the greatest, probably still marketing vehicle. I don't know that there's been another athlete that has been the advertising phenom that Michael Jordan has. But as far as, Steve, I agree with you, as far as meaningful, and they touched on it in the series, as far as being meaningful and impactful and standing for something, I still don't know what Michael Jordan stands for. Yeah. He stands for being a great pitchman and a fantastic basketball player. Ali would be a different story because you have someone who stood for something, and it cost him in his own way by doing that. But
look, I don't think there's an athlete that we can think of in the modern era that virtually lost 4 years of his career for what he believed in. I don't think
Kaepernick's approaching that. That's the only one. Kaepernick's approaching that.
Oh, Kaepernick,
but he
go back to the war.
Pardon?
Go back to the war years, and you've got some guys, baseball players, who lost years.
Ted Williams would be the greatest player of all time.
And Steve, my only thing with Kaepernick is that at the time he had lost his starting job, and then this all continued. Yeah. So we saw Ali at his peak. The guys like Angelo Dundee say you never saw his peak.
That's right.
Because at the time he was standing at 40.
Yeah.
And Bubba, thanks for pointing that out, because this Kaepernick thing, look, you can agree with Kaepernick or disagree with Kaepernick, but the martyrdom in the sense that this guy has lost his entire career. No, you're right. He was already on the descent he didn't have a starting job anymore. He would have still been an NFL player. But
well, number two quarterbacks have become extraordinarily important over the last 2 years, and he is definitely a top flight number two quarterback. So I don't buy that at all. Sorry.
No. He is a number two quarterback. He is not the guy, though, that we somehow have been told that this would have been the.
I don't know. I think that's a straw man argument.
What's that?
I think that's a straw dog argument. We'll set up
Ali was the top guy.
Yeah, they're not the same for sure.
It's not the same, but it's often been posed as the same kind of thing. That this is.
Yeah, I don't know how many people are actually doing that, but.
Yeah, the only close comparison we could make in this regard is if Patrick Mahomes was Colin Kaepernick, fresh off a Super Bowl win, MVP, and he said, I'm kneeling for the national anthem, and the KC Chiefs and the NFL say, you're out of here. Number one, they wouldn't say that, and it would be an entirely different story. So, there's obviously a lot of layers to the Colin Kaepernick story.
Good point.
Bubba, who'd be your first guy that you would want to see a documentary, whether 10 parts or maybe 8 or maybe 6 or whatever, but who would be?
Well, anything for a multiple point series. And you know what? I'm going to go off the board a little bit because I don't know if he's really an athlete. And I think what he represents for his sport, we've long asked if, his entertainment is sports. And that's Vince McMahon. Here's a guy that took over the company from his father, built it into something that I don't think any of us believed. I think we all have lived in that era, of course, the Hulk Hogan era, where the WWF went from, just its regular cyclical sort of style of sport that had its rays and curves and ups and downs into a giant money-making machine. And with WrestleMania became part of the sporting culture. And all of the things that went on throughout that whole period, and his need to start football. I mean, that we've seen now twice, 2 failures with the XFL, the rise and the fall, the fights within the athletes, and how to maintain control of his company. And now to a point right now where a lot of people are saying that he is ready to pack it in and sell the company. And of course, his family's involved in the company. But I think he'd be one of the more interesting people to kind of dissect and really see what goes on behind the scenes. Because we all know that with wrestling, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, because you're talking about the National Football League or whatever, and there's a season to it. Wrestling is something that goes on all year long. Almost every single night there's a WWF or WWE card, and I think that would be real interesting to find out what makes that guy tick.
Excellent.
You make a great point, Bob, because behind the scenes really is what made the Jordan series, The Last Dance, really compelling, because we know what he did on the basketball court. We know that he won titles and he was the MVP, this, that, and the other thing. But seeing Dennis Rodman going to Las Vegas in the debate about whether to allow him to go there or not, or seeing Michael Jordan, lounging on the couch with a cigar, debating whether it was worth, all the publicity to be the megastar that he was. It was those behind the scenes shots and scenes that were really compelling. So Vince McMahon, I mean, whether it's him or his family or some of the wrestlers arguing on who should win the title that night, that would be very intriguing to see.
Yeah, I think that, one of the things about him is that he's a game changer for a number of things, societally as well. And that's kind of like the great lie, right? We kind of all know that it wasn't true, but we were all kind of intrigued. And that spread out into our society as well as into sport. I mean, one of the things I think that's compelling about the UFC is it seems to have both of those things involved, that kind of showmanship but also with a certain brutal reality to it that wrestling doesn't really have. And I think wrestling being able to survive through all of those times. Jeff Day, the sports editor where I work, The Spectator, was with me at the Aurelia Pack at times, or just before that. And we used to have one of those games like the Canusa games called the Canis games with Auburn, New York. And the head photographer there had a really nice position. And he texted me, or I guess not text, phoned me would have been in those days, and said, I'm not going to be there anymore for these things because I'm going to move to, I forget where they were based. Was it Connecticut or New Jersey?
Connecticut.
He said, work with this little company that's really trying to get going again in wrestling. And pro wrestling was dead then. And he was the guy that became and just retired, I think, as the executive vice president of Images, which sold. That's what made it work, was the way they sold their TV and photos too. But long before they had the TV, they had all those wrestling magazines. So he had made the right choice there. We laughed at him. So what are you going to go to wrestling for? You got a nice little job at this little town paper. So and I've contacted him a couple of times a few years later. I said, I think you made the right choice on that one.
It would be the question I would have, because I think Rick is right. It's the behind the scenes stuff that makes the documentary. Just narrative doesn't do it unless you bring something. And I would love to know if Vince McMahon over the years has allowed cameras into the meetings, into the behind the scenes, or if he's never done it because he's afraid it'll leak out and will ruin the story, the image, whatever it is. Because if there is hundreds of hours of behind the scenes stuff, that would be terrific. And I can tell you, years ago, when the UFC was just getting going, and the UFC would be another one with Dana White and the start of the UFC, you could do it. Years ago, when Jeff Joslin was fighting in the UFC, well before the UFC is what it is now, I went down there to San Diego when he fought, and I had a press pass, and it was press pass then for the UFC was complete access anywhere, in the dressing rooms, out of the dressing rooms, in the medical room I could have gone. And I'm telling you, back then, to have a behind-the-scenes documentary, because I'm sitting there watching this, it was fascinating. It was amazing to watch. And I'm thinking, if they have all this film, and I just don't know if they do, because with the Jordan one, they knew that he was going, and so they had a camera crew with him the entire year. I just don't know that stuff exists. But boy, a good call, Bubba. That'll be a great one.
Wouldn't you think that he would? I mean, you think about all the tough decisions that he made, the death of Owen Hart, and I have a feeling that we would be seeing a very, I use these words lightly, kind of an old crusty man that maybe made a lot of decisions that a lot of people did not like.
I think
that and the story writing, the coming up with the storylines and stuff, it would be great. Steve, who would be your guy or girl? It can be either.
How about two together, because they're linked together. Relates to both what Bubba said and what Rick have said, because it's tied to Muhammad Ali and it's tied to Bubba in that it's off the grid. And that would be Tommy Smith and John Carlos at the 1968 as a group.
Black Power
with
salute.
one with the right hand, one with the left hand. And the story behind that is, of course, the one guy forgot to bring his gloves. They were going to use both gloves. And so only
If
one
only
pair.
OJ had been at the Olympics.
Yeah, right. So one had to be on the left and one. And people forget about the guy that finished second in that 200 meters race, the guy from Australia. I can't remember his name. The last name was Norman. And he went along with it too because he was white. So it tied to a number of things. And those guys got vilified. And over time, you know, it led to Jackie Robinson 3 or 4 years later becoming politicized. And the one thing that was why he was able to be the first African American in baseball is because he wasn't political and was able to take those things. He was not the best player in the Negro Leagues at that time. That would have been Josh Gibson. That would have been Satchel Paige, any one of those guys. But they chose him because they felt he could take it and he was non-politicized. Well, he became politicized almost directly because of and for the final few years of his life, almost directly because of what happened at the Olympics. And for people that don't remember or know, at the John Carlos was third. They're Americans, and the winner was Tommy Smith. Broke the world record in the 200 meters, well under 20 seconds, which was very rare at that time. John Carlos then set a world record in the 100 meters a few days later, I think. And when it came time for the medal presentations, I think they came with their shoes off and had black socks on to represent what was happening to black people in America. Because remember, Martin Luther King had just been killed before that. Muhammad Ali was undergoing all of the things that Rick pointed out, that lost his career. There was the Vietnam War. There was a million things going on. And this was, and it was also the Woodstock generation, all of those kinds of things that, there was a lot of protests going on. And it wasn't, they said black power so much as it was more freedom of the people. And it was all related to a guy named Harry Edwards, who's still around. And I think they'd be just an excellent documentary because it led to certainly to Kaepernick and certainly to other athletes speaking out. A lot of people say sports shouldn't be politicized, and they were kicked out of the games and forced to give their medals back at the time. And of course the IOC, as it usually did, took them about 20, 25 years to apologize for that to the families of both men. He played in the CFL too, by the way. John Carlos played 1 year in Montreal.
There you go. So I'm not sure you get 10 out of that one, but it's a fact.
No, I'm not. Well, I don't think there's enough stuff around.
No, well, and it's, it's difficult, especially when, Steve, I think you're dealing with a story that deserves to be told and would be really interesting, but for a huge segment of the population, if you said those two names, would get glassy stares on who they are until that documentary.
Well, we were just saying, what would I like to see? And
no, for sure.
And I think you could swing it so it's a cultural type of documentary. And there have been documentaries. All of the people we're going to talk about today and have talked about have had many, many documentaries. That's one of the great things that among the negative things about so much TV and needing so much copy has been the spectacular rise or re-rise of the documentary at all levels. Right?
Well, thank goodness that ESPN,
and I think it's fantastic.
Thank goodness ESPN had its 30th anniversary a few years ago, and someone came up with the idea because it's morphed into something pretty special.
Well, it's all over the place in all walks of life, particularly in the entertainment field.
We're short on time, so I'll keep mine nice and short and tight, and it's very similar to Rick's, but at the complete opposite end of the spectrum, I would go with Mike Tyson, because you have a guy who is a fascinating individual who has led a life that is, I don't even know that you could put a word to it, bizarre, strange, criminal, fascinating, championship, all these things. I don't know if you get 10 parts out of it, but boy, whatever you did, whatever parts you got, I think it would be unbelievable. It would be almost fictional.
I think that'd be a great one too. And the one thing that makes for good fiction, almost docudrama, is protagonist, antagonist. And that's one of the things that was highly, in my mind, missing in the Jordan thing. And that's why, it, to me, was less compelling than a number of things. There was a recency thing. We knew all that stuff. They had the access. But protagonist, antagonist, he made up all the antagonists. And they were very clear to point that out. He made things bigger than they were, so he had motivation. That came through so crystal clear through that whole thing. But when you talk Tyson, when you talk Ali, when you talk Carlos and Smith and even Vince McMahon, you have an antagonist, somebody against them, and that makes for good drama and
with enemies. With enemies.
That's what I mean, the antagonist. Yeah, protagonists and antagonists.
Yeah, Tyson series would be intriguing to watch too. And I remember, I think there was a 30 for 30 series that ESPN did on him. But I mean, he's got a lot of the same elements as some of the guys that we've already mentioned. He went to jail for obviously much different reasons than Ali did, that's for sure. You know, the Robin Givens thing, you know, growing up and becoming the boxer that he was, going to the Olympics, becoming the greatest fighter of his generation. The fall for against Buster Douglas, the Holyfield matches, maybe now the comeback. A great story from top to bottom.
No comeback.
Well, an attempted comeback. Hey,
Stop that there, Sam, right now. And just quickly, we're quickly throwing in a couple.
Yes.
The guy at the second for me, and I know there's been a 30 for 30 done, but I'd love to see a real in-depth look once again at Mike Vick.
That was a great one. That was a great two-parter that 30 for 30 did.
Unbelievable. The rise and fall, and maybe we can get even more access. And it's funny, Scott, you talk about that. After that two-parter, I was left wanting for more because I needed to know a couple more things about what was going on at the time. And we love, I think, as a sporting public, and I think maybe just the world winning time in entertainment, we love rise and fall and maybe even rise again stories. And he is certainly one of them. And from where he came from, what he turned out to be, the star power that he had, the connection with music and culture and hip hop and just exploding, and then being uncovered for this dog. I mean, it's the most sensitive thing that we as humans have, and is our affection for animals and pets. And the fact that all got on Peter, or whatever, Peter, the hatred for Michael Vick, it was unbelievable. When you really think about his career, it's crazy what happened to him.
Let's go around.
I'll throw three in just by names, and they can't be done. Jim Thorpe.
Yep.
Joe Namath.
Oh.
And Jesse Owens, Joe Louis. I'll just throw those there. I wish we had
years.
You talk rise and fall. How about Tiger Woods from the top of the heap to the bottom and almost back to the top again? Doug Flutie, I think, would be a compelling one. You got an NFL and a CFL kind of mishmash there. You can throw in some John Candy and Wayne Gretzky highlights. Harold Ballard, Steve, you mentioned an antagonist. That would be compelling. Another guy who went to jail. And Terry Fox, because his story can't be told enough.
Oh, yeah.
Babe Zacharias, who nobody really knows about anymore, but maybe the greatest athlete ever.
Yep.
Don't really know. I would say the Williams sisters, although, to be honest, I don't know that there's much. I mean, there's stuff there. I just don't know how much fascinating stuff there is behind the scenes. Unbelievable tennis players. I don't know what the other part. Maybe there's lots, and then maybe that's the story. But
Billie Jean had a real story.
And the other one that I would throw out that certainly there's not more than one part, but I'd like to see is a piece on Gilles Gratton, who, if you don't know who he is, maybe the nuttiest hockey player of all time. I think there would absolutely be something there. Who would be the person you would want to see a Last Dance style documentary on? All of our Twitter accounts are up on the screen. Let us know. Give us some feedback. We would love to hear from you. While you're at it, hit subscribe down below. Hit the little notification bell. Yeah, right down there. Hit that subscribe so you get notices for all the times that the Home Games series comes up. We appreciate you watching. We will talk to you soon.